Don't interfere. I'm marrying someone else. The Millionaire CEO spat coldly. 5 years later, he saw her again, and this time, even his heart couldn't walk away. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May the Almighty wrap every woman in gentle strength, endless grace and peace that stays through every storm. May your tears water the roots of new joy, and your silence bloom into songs of healing and hope. You are the light in dark places, the calm after chaos, and the heart that keeps love alive. May your days be kind, your heart unshaken, and your soul always at rest. My precious family, don't stay silent tonight. Your love keeps this home alive. A like is a whisper of faith. A comment is a spark of unity. This is Mission 1000 likes for every woman who still loves, still believes, still rises. If you carry love in your heart, like this video. If your spirit walks in faith, comment, "I'm with Mr. Peter." The rain came down like judgment, cold and relentless, turning the streetlights into blurred halos of accusation. Bill Savage stood on the sidewalk with water streaming down his face, staring up at the third-floor window where Martha Jansen was dismantling their future one packed box at a time. Her silhouette moved behind the thin curtains with the efficiency of someone who had made peace with a terrible decision. And that efficiency hurt worse than anything she could have said to his face. He wanted her to hesitate, to stop and press her palm against the glass, to give him some sign that leaving was tearing her apart the way it was destroying him. But Martha kept moving, kept packing, kept preparing to walk out of his life as if love alone had ever been enough to build a life on. Bill's leather jacket, the same one he'd worn on their first date when he could barely afford dinner at the diner on 5th Street, was soaked through to his shirt. Back then, he'd been a struggling architect with a portfolio full of dreams and a bank account full of nothing. She'd loved him anyway, loved him with a fierce certainty that made him believe he could build castles out of blueprints and hope. Now he stood in front of her building, with the keys to those castles in his pocket, owner of half the commercial real estate in the city. And none of it mattered, because the only thing he'd ever wanted was disappearing into cardboard boxes 12 feet above his head. The door to her building opened, and Bill's heart seized. But it wasn't Martha. An elderly woman with an umbrella gave him a pitying look before hurrying past, and Bill realized what he must look like, a man drowning on dry land, too stubborn or too broken to come in from the rain. He should go up there. He should take the stairs 2 at a time and tell her she was wrong. That his new world of suits and conference rooms and expectations didn't have to be hers, that they could build something together that belonged to both of them. But he didn't move. His feet stayed planted on the wet concrete, because somewhere in the months since his firm had grown from a small operation to something his family finally approved of. He'd started believing what everyone kept telling him, that Martha, with her second-hand dresses and her job at the Community Advocacy Office and her complete indifference to the social machinery that ran this city, would hold him back from becoming what the Savage name demanded he become. The worst part was that Martha had never asked him to choose. She'd simply handed back the engagement ring he'd given her when they had nothing, the small diamond he'd saved for across 8 months. And told him she wouldn't be the woman who kept him from his destiny. She'd used that word, destiny, as if his last name came with an instruction manual he was obligated to follow. She'd accepted a position abroad, something with an international development agency that would take her to the other side of the world. She was leaving. She was making it easy for him to become who everyone expected, and he was letting her because he was too much of a coward to fight for what he actually wanted. The light in her apartment went out. Bill's breath caught in his throat. This was it then. She was done packing, done with this place, done with him. He waited for the building door to open, for Martha to emerge with her suitcases and her dignity, and force him to finally say something, anything, that might change her mind. But minutes passed and she didn't appear. Maybe she'd seen him standing down here like a ghost, haunting his own life, and decided to spare them both the final conversation. Maybe she was sitting in the darkness of her empty apartment, crying the way he wanted to cry, but couldn't, because savage men didn't break, they built. They accumulated and achieved and conquered, but they didn't stand in the rain, mourning women who were brave enough to walk away. Bill finally moved, turning from the building and walking to his car, a new sedan that still smelled like leather and success and everything he thought he wanted. He sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, water dripping from his hair onto the pristine interior, and let himself imagine a different version of this night. One where he ran up those stairs and told Martha that destiny was a lie people told themselves when they were too afraid to write their own story. One where he said his last name didn't own him, that the savage empire could burn to the ground before he'd let it cost him her. One where they left together, got on a plane to wherever her new position was taking her, and built a life that belonged to them instead of to his family's expectations. But he didn't live in that version. He lived in this one, where he started the car and drove away from the only person who'd ever loved him for who he was, instead of what he could become. The city lights blurred past his windows, and Bill told himself this was the right choice, the mature choice, the responsible choice. Martha deserved someone who could love her without the weight of a family legacy crushing down on both of them. She deserved someone uncomplicated, someone whose future wasn't a predetermined path laid out by generations of men who'd built their fortunes on being harder than everyone else, sharper than everyone else, colder than everyone else. Months later, Bill stood in a cathedral with stained glass windows that cast colored light across the face of a woman he barely knew. Her name was Elizabeth Hartwick, and she came from the kind of family that understood what it meant to carry a name that weighed more than a person. The wedding was everything it should be, elegant and appropriate and completely empty of anything resembling joy. Elizabeth smiled at him with the practiced grace of someone who'd been trained since childhood to make strategic marriages look like love matches. And Bill said the words he was supposed to say while thinking about a third-floor apartment and a woman who was somewhere on the other side of the world, probably not thinking about him at all. The marriage was exactly what everyone said it should be. Elizabeth knew how to host dinners for his clients, how to navigate the social circles that opened doors Bill needed opened, how to be the perfect wife for a man building an empire. She never asked him if he loved her, which was a mercy because Bill didn't know how to lie that convincingly. They existed in the same house, attended the same functions, presented the same united front, and Bill told himself this was enough. This was what adult love looked like, partnership and compatibility and mutual respect. The fever dream of what he'd felt for Martha, that consuming fire that made him want to burn down his whole life just to keep her warm, that wasn't sustainable. That wasn't how people built lasting futures. Years passed. Elizabeth gave birth to twins, 2 girls they named Cora and Chloe. Bill held them in the hospital and made silent promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He swore he'd protect them from the expectations that had crushed him, that they'd grow up knowing they could choose their own paths, that they'd never feel obligated to marry someone appropriate instead of someone they loved. But even as he made those promises, he knew he was a hypocrite, a man who'd already shown his daughters through his own choices that love came second to legacy, that passion was something you outgrew, that the smart choice was always the safe choice, even when it hollowed you out from the inside. Elizabeth moved into the guest wing when the twins were 5. No dramatic confrontation preceded the move, just a quiet announcement over breakfast that she'd be sleeping in the other part of the house from now on. They'd continue to maintain appearances at public events, but she was done pretending in private. 2 years later, she asked for a divorce. She'd met someone, she said, someone who made her feel alive. Bill signed the papers without argument, gave her everything she asked for except primary custody of the twins. Elizabeth agreed immediately, which told him everything about what their marriage had done to her capacity to love even her own children. Now Bill stood alone in a house that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, listening to the silence that money couldn't fill. The twins stayed with him during the week, and he tried his best to be present, to be the father they deserved. On nights when the girls were asleep and the house creaked with emptiness, Bill let himself think about Martha. Not the real Martha, wherever she was now, but the ghost of who they'd been together. He wondered if she'd married, if she had children, if she ever thought about the architect who'd let her walk away rather than fight for her. The rain had stopped years ago, but Bill Savage still felt like he was standing on that sidewalk, watching the light go out in a third-floor window, choosing silence when he should have chosen to speak. Chapter 2. The Return. The conference room on the 18th floor had windows that overlooked the entire downtown corridor, glass and steel monuments to ambition reaching toward a sky that couldn't care less about human achievement. Bill sat at the head of the table, surrounded by men in expensive suits who treated city planning meetings like hostile takeovers, and tried to focus on the presentation about zoning variances and development permits. His latest project, a mixed-use complex that would transform blocks of the old warehouse district into luxury retail and premium office space, was meeting resistance from the new head of urban development. The position had changed hands twice in the past year, city politics churning through appointees like a meat grinder, and Bill had stopped paying attention to who held what title. They were all the same, bureaucrats who'd eventually bend to the pressure that money and influence could apply. The door opened. Bill glanced up, already preparing his opening argument about job creation and tax revenue and all the approved talking points that usually moved these conversations in his direction. Then he saw who'd walked into the room, and every word he'd prepared evaporated like water on hot stone. Martha Jansen stood in the doorway with a leather portfolio under her arm and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. She'd cut her hair shorter, traded her second-hand dresses for a tailored suit that suggested she'd learned how to navigate the corridors of power without sacrificing her principles. She looked at Bill the way someone looks at a stranger they're about to do business with. Polite and professional and completely devoid of personal history. And that deliberate absence of recognition hit him harder than if she'd screamed his name. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and clear as she took her seat across from Bill. "I appreciate your patience while I reviewed the proposal for the warehouse district development. I'm Martha Jansen, and I'll be overseeing this project evaluation on behalf of the city." Bill's hand tightened on his pen. "Martha, here, after 5 years of absence, 5 years of silence, 5 years of living like a ghost in his own life." The other developers in the room shifted in their seats, already sensing this meeting wouldn't follow the usual script. Martha opened her portfolio and spread documents across the table, with the confidence of someone who'd done her homework, who'd come prepared for battle, who wasn't going to be impressed by the Savage name or the Savage fortune or any of the weapons Bill usually deployed to get what he wanted. The proposal as submitted focuses heavily on luxury development. Martha continued, her eyes scanning the room, but never quite landing on Bill's face. Premium retail spaces, high-end restaurants, office suites targeting firms who can afford well above market rates. It's a beautiful vision on paper, aesthetically compelling, financially lucrative for the developer. What it fails to address is the displacement of the current community, the elimination of affordable housing stock, and the complete absence of any benefit to the residents who've kept that neighborhood alive while everyone else forgot it existed. One of Bill's associates started to argue, launching into the prepared response about revitalization and economic growth. But Martha cut him off with a gesture that was somehow both polite and absolute. "I've heard the talking points," she said. "I've read the impact studies your firm commissioned, which unsurprisingly found that your project would be wonderful for everyone. I've also commissioned independent studies from organizations that don't have a financial stake in seeing this project approved. The data tells a different story. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your proposal back and revise it to include affordable housing units, community spaces that serve the existing population, and a genuine commitment to preserving the character of a neighborhood that doesn't need saving from itself. Or you're going to find yourself fighting this battle in public forums and city council meetings, while your investors get nervous and your financing gets complicated. Your choice, gentlemen. The room erupted in protests, carefully modulated protests that maintained a veneer of professionalism while making it clear that Martha had just declared war. Bill watched her handle each objection with the calm competence of someone who'd anticipated every argument and prepared for every angle of attack. She'd learned, he realized, how to fight these battles on their terms while refusing to compromise her principles. The Martha who'd left 5 years ago would have been passionate and earnest, appealing to people's better nature. This Martha had figured out that power respected power, that moral authority alone couldn't stop a development deal, but strategic obstruction certainly could. The meeting ended without resolution, both sides agreeing to regroup after reviewing positions, which was corporate language for neither side planning to budge an inch. The other developers filed out, already pulling out their phones to start applying pressure through their various networks. Bill stayed in his seat, papers spread in front of him that he wasn't actually seeing, waiting for Martha to leave so he could watch her walk away again, so he could confirm that the last 5 years hadn't been some elaborate dream, and this was actually his reality now. Fighting against the woman he loved over blocks of crumbling warehouses that didn't matter nearly as much as everyone pretended they did. But Martha didn't leave. She gathered her documents with deliberate slowness, giving the room time to empty, and then she looked directly at Bill for the first time since entering. Her eyes were the same, that impossible shade between brown and gold that changed with the light, but everything behind them was different. Guarded where she'd once been open, strategic where she'd once been spontaneous, armored where she'd once been vulnerable. "Hello, Bill," she said quietly, and the sound of his name in her voice after 5 years of silence nearly broke him. "Martha." He stood, suddenly aware of how ridiculous he must look, still sitting while she stood, still frozen while she'd clearly moved on with her entire life. "I didn't know you were back, in the city, taking this position. Would it have changed anything if you'd known?" The question wasn't bitter, just genuinely curious, and Bill didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound like an excuse or a lie. "How long have you been back?" he asked instead, deflecting because he'd gotten good at deflection, at avoiding conversations that required him to be honest about what he felt. 3 months. Long enough to review every development proposal in the pipeline, including yours. Martha closed her portfolio with a soft snap that sounded like punctuation, like the end of something. "I'm not going to apologize for doing my job. Bill, that neighborhood deserves better than being erased, so you can build monuments to wealth that only benefit people who already have everything." "It's not like that." The words came out defensive, automatic, the response of someone who'd spent years convincing himself that profit and progress were the same thing. "We're creating jobs, bringing investment, revitalizing an area that's been neglected." Neglected by whom? The people living there seem to be doing fine until developers decide their homes aren't valuable enough. Martha moved toward the door, and Bill felt panic rise in his chest. The same panic from that night in the rain when he'd watched her pack and done nothing to stop her. "I read about your marriage ending. I'm sorry it didn't work out." The words should have been comforting, an acknowledgement of shared pain, but they felt like a final severance, Martha being kind about something she had no stake in anymore. Bill wanted to tell her that his marriage had been doomed from the beginning, because he'd spent every day of it wishing he was with someone else. That he'd built his empire and lost everything that mattered. That seeing her walk into this conference room had been like being struck by lightning after years of living in numbness. Instead, he said nothing, paralyzed by the same cowardice that had let her leave the first time. Martha paused at the door, her hand on the frame, and for a moment Bill thought she might turn around, might give him another chance to say something that mattered, but she didn't. She walked out, her footsteps receding down the hallway, and Bill stood alone in the conference room, with the city spread out below him. Everything he'd built and nothing he wanted. That evening, Bill drove home to the mansion that felt less like a home and more like a museum of choices he regretted. The twins were in the kitchen working on homework with serious concentration. Cora looked up when Bill entered, her face brightening in the way that made his chest ache. "We learned about architecture today," Chloe announced. "Mrs. Patterson said buildings tell stories about the people who make them." "What stories do your buildings tell?" Bill sat down at the kitchen table and tried to figure out how to answer a question that suddenly felt like an indictment. "I think," he said slowly, "that buildings should tell stories about hope, about creating spaces where people can build good lives." "I'm not sure all my buildings tell that story yet." Cora tilted her head, studying her father with unsettling perception. "Then why do you keep making them?" "Why indeed?" Bill looked at his daughters and realized he didn't have an answer. Later, after the twins were asleep, Bill stood in his study and pulled an old file from the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside were photographs from another life. Martha laughing at a street fair, Martha asleep on his ratty couch, Martha wearing the engagement ring he'd saved for. He'd told himself he'd thrown these away, but apparently he was a sentimental fool after all. Bill spread the photographs across his desk and let himself remember what it felt like to love someone without calculation. Then he gathered them up and put them back in the drawer, locked it away where it belonged. Martha was back. In his city, in his projects, in his life, whether he'd planned for it or not. And Bill had no idea if this was punishment or second chance, destruction or redemption, the ending he deserved or the beginning he'd been too afraid to fight for the first time. Chapter 3. The Collision. The meetings became a regular occurrence, a weekly torture session, disguised as professional collaboration. Martha arrived prepared with data and community testimonials and alternative proposals that carved away at Bill's project, like water eroding stone. She was relentless but never cruel, passionate but never irrational, and Bill found himself looking forward to their arguments the way a drowning man might look forward to air. Being opposed by Martha was the most alive he'd felt in years, which said something deeply pathetic about the life he'd constructed for himself. 3 weeks into their professional stalemate, Bill made the mistake of bringing Cora and Chloe to his office after school. The household manager had a family emergency, and Bill's sister was traveling. He'd planned to let the twins do homework in his conference room while he finished reviewing contracts, a simple afternoon that wouldn't disrupt anyone. Then Martha walked in for their scheduled meeting, and simple became complicated in ways Bill couldn't have anticipated. The twins looked up from their drawings when Martha entered, their identical faces showing identical curiosity. Martha froze in the doorway, her professional composure cracking for just a moment as she registered the 2 small girls watching her with unfiltered interest. "I'm sorry," Martha said, already backing toward the door. "I didn't realize you had your children here. We can reschedule." "No!" Chloe jumped up with enthusiasm. "Please don't go." "Are you here to argue with our dad? He says you're very good at arguing." Bill closed his eyes, wondering what higher power he'd offended to deserve this particular humiliation. "That's not exactly what I said." "You said she makes better arguments than anyone else you know," Cora corrected. "You said she makes you work harder to be right." Martha's expression shifted, surprise flickering across her features before she controlled it. She looked at Bill with something that might have been amusement or might have been pain. "Your daughters are observant," Martha said quietly, stepping fully into the room but maintaining careful distance. "What are you drawing?" The question opened floodgates. Chloe launched into an enthusiastic explanation of her architectural sketch, a fantastical building that combined elements from every structure she'd ever seen with confident disregard for physics. Cora showed her mathematical diagrams, working out problems their teacher had assigned, but adding her own complications because the original questions weren't challenging enough. Martha knelt down to their level, asking genuine questions and offering thoughtful responses. And Bill watched from behind his desk, feeling like an intruder in his own office. This was what he'd stolen from them, he realized. Not money or opportunities, the twins had all of those in abundance. He'd stolen the possibility of having a parent who engaged with them like they were complete humans, rather than projects to be managed. Elizabeth had never asked what they were drawing, had never cared about their mathematical theories or architectural dreams. But watching Martha with his daughters for 5 minutes showed him exactly how insufficient his parenting had been, how much warmth and genuine interest he'd failed to provide. "Your father tells me you're excellent students," Martha said, straightening up but maintaining eye contact with the twins. "We're okay," Cora said with brutal self-assessment. "We're good at school, but not good at other things." "What other things?" Martha pulled out a chair and sat down. "Making friends," Chloe admitted. "Everyone at school knows who our father is, knows how much money we have, so they're either mean about it or they're only nice because they want things. We can't tell which is real." Bill's chest constricted. He'd known his daughters struggled socially, had seen the evidence in their reluctance to attend birthday parties and their lack of close friendships. But hearing them articulate it so clearly made it real in a way he'd been avoiding. Martha's expression softened, and she reached out to touch Chloe's hand gently. "That's hard. Feeling like you can't trust whether people like you for you. I understand that more than you might think." "Really?" Cora looked skeptical. "Really? I grew up without much money, and when I met your father, he didn't have much either. We liked each other for who we were, not for what we had. But then things changed, and suddenly what we had seemed more important than who we were, and it got complicated." Martha glanced up at Bill, and the look carried years of pain compressed into a single moment. "Sometimes having everything makes it harder to know what matters." "Did you stop being friends with our dad because he got rich?" Chloe asked with directness that made Bill's colleagues uncomfortable. "That's complicated," Martha said, but her eyes stayed on Bill's. "We stopped being friends because we wanted different things, or at least we thought we did. Sometimes people make decisions based on what they think they're supposed to want instead of what they actually want, and by the time they figure out the difference..." Too much time has passed. The room fell silent. The twins processing Martha's words with seriousness. Bill processing the realization that Martha wasn't just talking to his daughters. She was talking to him through his daughters, saying things she couldn't say directly. "I should let you get back to your meeting," Bill said, standing up. "Girls, finish your homework. We'll leave in an hour." But Chloe wasn't ready to let Martha go. "Will you come back? To visit us, not just to argue with Dad?" Martha looked at Bill, asking permission with her eyes, and he nodded even though every instinct told him this was dangerous. She smiled at the twins, and Bill saw the woman he'd loved 5 years ago in that smile. "I'd like that," Martha said, "if your father thinks it's okay." The meeting that followed was the most civil they'd managed, probably because both of them were too aware of the 2 small humans in the next room. They found compromises on minor points, agreed to review alternatives on major ones, and managed to end the session without anyone threatening legal action. Bill walked Martha to the elevator, needing a moment away from those 2 perceptive eyes. "They're wonderful," Martha said as they waited. "You've done well with them, despite everything." "I've done terribly with them," Bill corrected. "They're wonderful in spite of me, not because of me. They're growing up thinking money is a burden instead of a blessing, thinking relationships are transactional, thinking they have to be perfect to deserve love. I'm raising them the way I was raised, and it's destroying them the same way it destroyed me." The elevator arrived, doors opening with a soft chime, but Martha didn't step inside. She turned to face him fully. "Then change it," she said simply. "You have that power. You're their father. Show them something different." "I don't know how," Bill admitted. "I don't know how to be different than what I am." "Yes, you do. You were different once, with me. Before you decided being Bill Savage meant more than being Bill. Martha stepped into the elevator, and the doors started to close, but she held them open for one more moment. Your daughters ask questions about buildings telling stories. What story are you telling them about what matters? The doors closed before Bill could answer. He went back to his office, where Cora and Chloe were packing up their homework, both girls wearing expressions that suggested they'd been discussing something serious. We like her, Cora announced. We like that she doesn't talk to us like we're stupid just because we're kids. We like that she makes you different, Chloe added. When she's around, you smile more. You look less tired. Bill ushered them toward the elevator, unsettled by how visible his emotions apparently were. In the car, Chloe asked if Martha would really come visit them, and Bill said he didn't know that Martha was very busy with important work. But privately, he hoped she would, hoped she'd follow through on the promise she'd made to two little girls who desperately needed examples of what genuine connection looked like. That night, Bill received a text from his ex-wife. They needed to talk about custody arrangements. Her fiancé wanted to be more involved in the girls' lives, wanted them to spend more time at his house, wanted to blend their families properly. Bill stared at the message and felt something cold settle in his chest. Elizabeth had checked out of their children's lives, barely maintaining minimal visitation. And now she wanted to renegotiate because her new relationship required the appearance of maternal involvement. Bill typed and deleted 3 responses before finally agreeing to meet. He wouldn't lose his daughters to Elizabeth's sudden need to play house. Cora and Chloe deserved stability, deserved to stay in the one home that had been consistent, even if that home was run by a father who didn't know what he was doing most of the time. As Bill lay in bed that night, he thought about Martha's question. What story was he telling his daughters? That success meant loneliness? That love was something you sacrificed for advancement? He'd spent years building an empire, and his daughters were growing up in its shadow, learning all the wrong lessons. Martha had walked back into his world and immediately exposed every crack in the foundation he'd built. And now his ex-wife wanted to take his daughters away. And Bill didn't know if he could fight back without becoming the ruthless version of himself he was trying to escape. Chapter 4. The Proposal. The revised development proposal sat on Bill's desk like an accusation. 200 pages of concessions and compromises that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. His project manager had walked into his office, dropped the document with barely concealed disgust, and informed Bill that implementing these changes would cut their profit margin significantly. The board would revolt. His investors would demand explanations. His father would call this capitulation weakness, the beginning of the end of everything the Savage name represented. Bill opened the proposal and read through Martha's revisions. Affordable housing units integrated throughout the development instead of segregated to the least desirable locations. Community spaces that served existing residents rather than just attracting new money. Green spaces and public areas that prioritized people over commerce. Local support programs to help current shop owners transition rather than being displaced. It was everything Martha had been demanding, everything his team had been resisting, everything that made sense if you believed development should serve communities instead of just extracting wealth from them. He picked up his phone and called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon. No preparation, no warning, no carefully crafted presentation to soften what he was about to propose. If he gave himself time to think about this rationally, he'd talk himself out of it, would find reasons why profit mattered more than doing something right for once in his calculated life. The boardroom filled with men who looked like variations of Bill's father, successful and sharp-edged and fundamentally uninterested in anything that didn't increase returns. Bill distributed copies of the revised proposal and watched their expressions shift from confusion to anger as they processed what they were reading. "This is a joke," his father said, not bothering with preamble. Tell me this is a negotiating tactic, something to make the city official feel heard before we implement the real plan. This is the real plan, Bill said, keeping his voice level even though his heart was hammering. We're accepting the city's recommendations and moving forward with a mixed-use development that serves the community already there instead of erasing it. The room erupted. Questions about profit margins and investor expectations and competitive positioning, all the language of business that Bill had been fluent in for so long, it had become his primary way of understanding the world. He let them vent, let them express their outrage and disbelief, and then he did something he'd never done in a board meeting before. He told them the truth. I don't care about the profit margin, Bill said quietly, and the room went silent. I don't care if we make less on this project. I don't care if investors get nervous or if this makes us look weak to competitors. What I care about is that we're destroying a neighborhood so we can build monuments to wealth that benefit no one except people who already have everything. What I care about is that my daughters ask me what stories my buildings tell, and I realize the story I've been telling is that money matters more than people, that success is worth any cost, that the savage name is more important than actually being decent human beings. His father stood up, face flushed with anger. You're throwing away everything we've built because you've gotten sentimental. This is about that woman, isn't it? The city official who has you wrapped around her finger? Her name is Martha, Bill said, meeting his father's glare without flinching. And yes, this is partly about her. It's about the fact that she walked away from me 5 years ago because I chose this over her. It's about the fact that I married someone I didn't love to build a family legacy that made everyone miserable. It's about the fact that I'm raising daughters in an empire that's teaching them all the wrong lessons about what makes a life worth living. So yes, I'm changing the plan, and if you don't like it, you're welcome to vote me out. The silence that followed was absolute. Bill had just challenged the board to remove him, something that was technically possible but practically complicated. His father sat back down slowly, studying Bill like he was seeing someone unfamiliar. You're serious about this, his father said finally, completely serious. We're moving forward with the revised plan, or I'm walking away from this project entirely. Those are the options. The vote was close, closer than Bill expected, but it passed. 3 board members submitted their resignations before the meeting ended, and Bill accepted them without trying to change their minds. He knew more would follow, knew he'd just put a crack in the foundation of his professional reputation that might never fully heal. But sitting in that boardroom, watching men prioritize profit over people, Bill felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. He felt like himself again. Bill called Martha that evening, the first personal call he'd made to her since she'd returned. She answered after 3 rings, her voice cautious. I accepted your revisions, Bill said, without preamble. All of them. We're moving forward with the mixed-use development that prioritizes community over profit. The silence on the other end stretched so long, Bill thought she might have hung up. Then Martha's voice came through, soft and uncertain. Why? Because you were right. Because my daughters asked me what stories my buildings tell, and I didn't have a good answer. Because I'm tired of building an empire that destroys everything that actually matters. Bill leaned back in his office chair. Because I let you walk away 5 years ago when I should have fought for you. And I've been making wrong choices ever since. And maybe it's too late to fix that, but at least I can stop making the same mistakes. Bill, Martha said, and he could hear tears in her voice. This is going to cost you. I know. 3 board members already resigned. My father thinks I've lost my mind. My investors are probably drafting strongly worded letters. But you know what? I don't care. For the first time in 5 years, I'm doing something because it's right instead of because it's profitable. And it feels better than any quarterly report ever has. They talked for an hour, the conversation shifting from the development project to their lives, carefully navigating around the history between them, but unable to completely avoid it either. Martha told him about her years abroad, working with communities fighting displacement. Bill told her about his marriage falling apart, about his daughters growing up isolated by wealth, about the slow realization that he'd built a life that looked successful but felt empty. When they finally ended the call, Bill sat in the darkness of his office and let himself feel hope for the first time in years. Maybe this was the beginning of becoming someone different, someone his daughters could learn from instead of someone they had to overcome. The next morning, Bill woke to his phone exploding with messages. The business press had somehow gotten word of his decision, and speculation was rampant. Some articles framed it as savvy political maneuvering, others as weakness and capitulation. Bill's father left a voicemail demanding an immediate family meeting. His investors wanted conference calls to discuss strategy. Bill ignored all of it. Instead, he made breakfast for Cora and Chloe, actually standing in the kitchen and cooking eggs and toast. The twins appeared in their pajamas, shocked to find their father wielding a spatula. "What happened?" Cora asked suspiciously. "Did someone die?" "Why would you assume someone died?" Bill flipped an egg. "Because you never cook." "Something must be wrong." Chloe climbed onto a stool at the kitchen island. Bill plated the eggs and toast, slightly burned but edible, and sat down with his daughters. "Nothing's wrong. Actually, things are more right than they've been in a long time. I made some decisions yesterday about work, about how I want to do things differently. I wanted to celebrate by doing something different at home, too." "What kind of decisions?" Cora asked. "I decided to build something that helps people instead of just making money. I decided to work with someone instead of fighting against her. I decided to stop caring so much about what other people think I should do and start caring more about what I think is right." Bill looked at his daughters. "I want you two to know that success isn't just about how much money you make or how important your job is. It's about whether you're proud of what you're building, whether you're treating people well, whether you're living in a way that matches your values." Chloe considered this while chewing her toast. "Is this about Martha, the lady from your office?" Bill shouldn't have been surprised that his daughters had connected the dots. "Partly about her, yes. She reminded me of who I used to be before I started caring more about business than people." "We like her," Cora said decisively. "You should spend more time with her. Maybe she'll keep reminding you." If only it were that simple. Bill didn't tell his daughters that Martha had every reason to want nothing to do with him personally, that professional collaboration didn't erase 5 years of hurt. Instead, he finished breakfast with his girls and drove them to school. And for the first time in months, they actually seemed happy to be with him. The professional collaboration that followed was different than before. Bill and Martha met regularly to coordinate the revised development, and the antagonism that had characterized their earlier meetings shifted into something more complicated. They were working toward the same goal now, but the ease that should have accompanied alignment never quite materialized. Too much history stood between them, too many unspoken questions about what changing this project might mean. Martha came to Bill's office one evening after the twins had gone home, bringing final designs for the community spaces. They spread blueprints across the conference table, discussing layouts and accessibility. But halfway through the meeting, Martha stopped talking and just looked at Bill, really looked at him in a way she hadn't since that first conference room encounter. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "And don't give me the answer about your daughters or doing what's right. Tell me the real reason." Bill put down his pen. "Because I let you leave 5 years ago. Because I married someone I didn't love and built an empire I don't respect and raised daughters in a world that's teaching them everything I wish I didn't believe. Because seeing you walk into that conference room felt like waking up after years of sleepwalking. And I realized I've been making choices based on what I'm supposed to want instead of what I actually want. And I'm done living like that." Martha's eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. 5 years ago, I left because your world demanded things I couldn't provide." "What's changed?" "You're still Bill Savage. You still have a family legacy and expectations and all the complications that made us impossible. What's changed is that I don't care anymore. About the legacy, about the expectations, about being the man my father thinks I should be. I care about being someone my daughters can respect, someone who builds things that matter, someone who has the courage to fight for what he wants instead of accepting what other people think he should settle for. Bill moved around the table. I'm not asking you to give me another chance. I know I don't deserve that. I'm just asking you to let me prove I've changed, that I can be the man you needed 5 years ago. Martha stepped back, maintaining space. I can't do this, Bill. I spent 5 years getting over you, building a life that didn't include waiting for you to figure out what you wanted. I can't risk that again. I understand, Bill said, even though understanding didn't make it hurt less. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just telling you that I'm not walking away this time. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just know that I'm here and I'm done running. Martha gathered her papers and headed for the door, but she paused at the threshold. Your daughters deserve better than watching you pine for something you can't have, she said softly. Make sure whatever you're doing it for them first. Then she was gone, and Bill was alone with blueprints spread across the table. Plans for building something better laid out in precise detail, and no idea if the foundation he was trying to construct would hold. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. The custody motion arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier while Bill was having breakfast with Cora and Chloe. The envelope looked official and ominous, and Bill knew what it contained before he opened it. Elizabeth wanted to modify their custody arrangement. Emergency hearing requested. Concerns about stability and parenting decisions raised. Bill's recent erratic behavior cited as evidence of declining judgment. The legal language was cold and clinical, but the message was clear. His ex-wife wanted his daughters. Bill sent the twins off to school without letting them see his panic, maintaining the calm facade he'd perfected over years of pretending everything was under control. Then he called his attorney, a sharp woman who'd handled his divorce and who knew how dysfunctional his marriage had been. She's using the development project, his attorney said after reviewing the motion. The fact that you dramatically changed a profitable deal, resigned board members, accepted significant cuts. Her lawyers are painting it as evidence of instability, poor judgment, prioritizing personal relationships over your children's welfare. That's insane, Bill said. But even as he protested, he could see how it looked from the outside. Successful developer suddenly changes course, makes decisions that cost him millions, apparently influenced by a woman from his past. She's also citing your relationship with Martha Jansen. There are photos of you two meeting, having dinner to discuss the project. Her lawyers are suggesting it's inappropriate, that you're exposing your daughters to an unstable romantic situation. We're working together professionally. That's all. Bill heard the defensiveness in his own voice. I believe you, his attorney said, but we need to prepare for them making this look as bad as possible. The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Until then, you need to be beyond reproach. No dramatic decisions, no public changes, no giving them ammunition. Bill hung up, feeling like the walls were closing in. He'd finally started becoming someone he could respect, and now that transformation was being used as evidence against him. Every choice he made would be scrutinized for signs of instability. He called Martha, needing to warn her that their professional relationship was being weaponized. She answered immediately, her voice warm until he explained the situation, then going cold and professional. I should step back from the project, Martha said. If my involvement is hurting your custody case, I'll hand it off to my deputy. No, Bill said firmly. Stepping back now makes it look like there's something inappropriate to hide. We keep working together, keep it completely professional, and prove that I'm making good decisions for good reasons. Bill, if this costs you your daughters, it won't. I won't let it. But Bill didn't feel as confident as he sounded. Elizabeth had checked out of their children's lives, but she had the advantage of looking stable. She had a new relationship, a new family structure, a conventional life that fit judicial expectations. The twins sensed something was wrong immediately. Children always knew when adults were lying about things being fine. Cora asked directly if something was wrong, and Bill tried to explain without scaring them. Your mother wants you to spend more time at her house with her fiancé. There's going to be a hearing where a judge decides what's best for you two. We don't want to live with Mom more, Chloe said immediately. She's nice, but she doesn't really know us. We want to stay here with you. Bill's heart broke and soared simultaneously. That's not really your decision, sweetheart. The judge will decide what he thinks is best. Then we'll tell the judge we want to stay with you, Cora said with absolute certainty. Over the next 2 weeks, Bill watched his life unravel with agonizing slowness. Martha did step back from direct meetings, communicating primarily through email and her deputy, maintaining professional distance that made strategic sense, but felt like abandonment. The twins became withdrawn, worry manifesting in their perfect grades, slipping slightly. Bill tried to maintain normalcy while preparing for a hearing that would determine whether his recent growth would be rewarded or punished. His sister came to visit, the only family member who'd supported his choices without judgment. She found Bill in his study late one night reviewing legal documents. You look terrible, she said, pouring herself a drink from his bar. When did you last sleep? I don't remember. Sometime before my ex-wife decided to destroy me for finally figuring my life out. She sat across from him. You know what I see? I see someone who's finally fighting for something instead of just accepting what everyone expects. It's about time. It's costing me my daughters, Bill said. I tried to do something right for once, and now Elizabeth is using it to take them away. Is that what this is really about? His sister leaned forward. Or is this about the fact that you're terrified of making the same mistakes again, so you're preparing to give up before you even fight? Bill looked up sharply. What's that supposed to mean? It means you have a pattern, Bill. You sacrifice what you want for what everyone else thinks you should want, and then you resent it and destroy yourself trying to live with choices you never actually agreed to. You did it with Martha 5 years ago. You did it with your marriage. You've done it with your entire career. And now you're about to do it again with your daughters, convincing yourself you're protecting them when really you're just running away from the possibility of losing. I'm not running, Bill protested. But his sister's words hit too close to uncomfortable truth. The one that's honest, his sister said. The one that shows your daughters that fighting for what matters is worth the risk. You know what they're learning right now, watching you prepare to lose. They're learning that you give up when things get hard. They're learning that love and authenticity aren't worth fighting for. Bill slumped in his chair. I don't know how to do this differently. I don't know how to fight for them without risking losing them. Yes, you do. You fight by showing the judge who you actually are now, not who you were or who Elizabeth's lawyers want to paint you as. You fight by being honest about why you made the choices you made. You fight by trusting that truth matters more than appearances. His sister stood up. And maybe you fight by letting Martha stand beside you instead of protecting her by pushing her away. Your daughters are watching how you handle this, Bill. What lesson do you want to teach them? After she left, Bill sat in the darkness and thought about patterns, about choices, about all the ways he'd spent his life running from anything that required him to be vulnerable or brave. His sister was right. He'd been preparing to lose his daughters the same way he'd prepared to lose Martha, convinced that protecting himself from pain was more important than fighting for what mattered. The next morning, Bill called his attorney and told her he wanted to be completely honest in the hearing. No careful presentations or strategic omissions. He wanted to tell the truth about his marriage, his choices, his recent changes, and why they made him a better father. She tried to caution him, but Bill was done with strategy. He also called Martha, asking to meet in person. She agreed to coffee and showed up looking guarded but curious. Bill told her about his sister's visit, about the pattern of giving up before fighting. "I'm not asking you to get involved in my custody hearing," Bill said. "But I am asking you to stop pretending we're just professional colleagues. We were in love once. We might still be, under all the complications and history. And I'm tired of running from that because it might be hard or messy or complicated." Martha stirred her coffee, not meeting his eyes. "What are you asking for?"
I'm asking for you to let me try.
"To be present with my daughters, to show them what it looks like when someone fights for connection instead of accepting isolation. To stop stepping back every time things get difficult." Bill reached across the table. "I let you walk away 5 years ago because I was afraid of choosing you over everyone else's expectations. I'm not making that mistake again." Martha's eyes filled with tears, and she finally looked at him directly. "This is going to hurt, Bill. Even if you win custody, even if we try and it works, there's going to be pain and complications." "I know. But at least it'll be real pain from choosing authentically, instead of the hollow pain of living a life that looks right but feels empty." Bill pulled his hand back. "You don't have to decide anything now. Just think about whether you're staying away because you don't want this or because you're afraid of wanting it." They parted without resolution, but something had shifted. Bill had stopped hiding behind careful distance, had admitted what he wanted, even though wanting it was dangerous. The custody hearing loomed 3 days away, and Bill prepared by being honest. Honest with his lawyers about his history with Martha, about why his marriage had failed, about the choices he'd made and why. Honest with his daughters about what the hearing meant. Honest with himself about the fact that he'd spent years building a life that looked successful while feeling empty. For the first time in 5 years, Bill Savage walked toward something difficult without already planning his retreat. It terrified him, but it also made him feel more alive than he'd felt since watching Martha pack boxes while he stood in the rain, too afraid to fight. Chapter 6. The Testimony. The courtroom was smaller than Bill expected, as if something as enormous as determining his daughter's futures should require a more substantial stage. Elizabeth sat on the opposite side with her fiancé and attorneys, all projecting confidence. Bill's lawyer had prepared him for worst-case scenarios, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of having every choice he'd made dissected for evidence of inadequacy. Elizabeth's lead attorney stood and began painting a picture of a man in crisis. The profit cut on the warehouse development framed not as ethical growth, but as financial instability. The board members who'd resigned presented as colleagues fleeing a sinking ship. The relationship with Martha twisted into something tawdry and distracting. Bill's failed marriage used as evidence that he couldn't maintain stable relationships. Even his absence from society events was reframed as warning signs of someone spiraling. Mr. Savage has demonstrated a pattern of erratic decision-making that calls into question his fitness to serve as primary custodian, the attorney concluded. His recent choices show a man prioritizing personal desires over his children's stability, making impulsive changes that affect their financial security, and exposing them to romantic instability. My client simply wants these children to spend more time in a stable home environment, with clear values and consistent parenting. Bill listened to his entire life being rewritten as pathology and felt fury rise in his chest. But his attorney had coached him to stay calm, to let her handle the rebuttal. His attorney stood and systematically dismantled each argument. The development project represented ethical evolution, not instability, as evidenced by positive community response. The board members who resigned were those opposed to socially responsible development. The relationship with Martha was professional collaboration with a city official, and even if it developed into something more, there was nothing inappropriate about a divorced man pursuing a relationship. Mr. Savage's ex-wife claims she wants what's best for the children, his attorney said, voice sharp with controlled anger. But the custody arrangement has been in place for 2 years, during which time she has consistently exercised minimal visitation. The girls are thriving in their father's care, maintaining excellent grades, developing genuine friendships, and showing all markers of stable adjustment. The only thing that changed is that Mr. Savage became happier, more present, and more authentic in his parenting. The back and forth continued through the morning, each side presenting evidence and witnesses. Bill's household manager testified about his involvement with the girls, their happiness and well-being. Elizabeth's fiancé testified about the structured family environment he could provide. Expert witnesses debated psychological impacts with clinical detachment. Then, the judge called a recess and asked to see the twins in his chambers, privately without attorneys or parents present. Bill's stomach dropped. The fact that the judge wanted to hear from them directly meant either this decision was closer than Bill hoped, or the proceedings had raised concerns that required direct assessment. Cora and Chloe followed the bailiff out with serious expressions, both wearing the matching dresses Bill had let them choose. They glanced back at their father, and Bill tried to communicate confidence he didn't feel. Whatever happened in that chamber would shape the rest of their childhoods, and Bill had no control over it. The recess lasted 45 minutes that felt like 45 years. Bill sat in the hallway with his attorney, neither of them speaking because there was nothing to say. Elizabeth stood across the corridor with her legal team, and occasionally their eyes would meet. When the judge reconvened court, his expression was carefully neutral, revealing nothing about what the twins had told him. He announced that he needed additional time to review the case thoroughly, ordering a 2-week recess for further evaluation. During this period, the current custody arrangement would continue unchanged, but with specific stipulations. Bill was not to make any major life changes, not to introduce new people into his daughter's routine, not to alter their living situation. The order was meant to maintain stability, but it felt like a cage. What did they tell him? Bill asked his attorney as they left the courthouse. We won't know until the final ruling. Judges keep children's testimony confidential to protect them from parental pressure or retaliation. She gathered her papers. The 2-week evaluation period could go either way. He's either giving himself time to think through a difficult decision, or he's investigating concerns. Either way, you need to be absolutely beyond reproach. Beyond reproach meant no contact with Martha beyond bare minimum professional coordination. It meant maintaining perfect routines with the twins, perfect attendance at their school functions, perfect evidence of stability. It meant putting his entire life on hold while someone else decided if he deserved to keep being a father. Bill went home and tried to act normal for Cora and Chloe, but they saw through him immediately. The judge was nice, Chloe offered as they sat down for dinner. He asked us questions about school and our friends and what we like to do. Did he ask about me and your mom? Bill tried to keep his voice casual. He asked if we were happy, Cora said carefully. He asked if we felt safe, and if anyone treated us badly, and if we wanted anything to be different about our lives. What did you tell him? Bill couldn't help asking, even though he knew he shouldn't. The twins exchanged a glance. Chloe spoke first. We told him the truth, that Mom is nice but busy with her new family, that we want her to be happy, but we don't want to live somewhere we don't feel like we belong, that you've been different lately, better, more like the dad we need, instead of the dad who was always tired and distracted. She paused. We told him about Martha. Bill's heart stopped. What about Martha? That she makes you smile the way people smile in movies. That she asks us real questions and listens to whole answers. That she doesn't feel like a stranger trying to fit into our family. She feels like someone who already belongs, without even trying. Cora met her father's eyes. Was that wrong? Did we mess things up for you? Bill got up and pulled both girls into a hug, holding them tightly, while trying not to let them hear the emotion in his voice. You didn't mess anything up. You told the truth, and that's always the right thing to do. But privately, Bill worried about impact. The judge had ordered him not to introduce new people into their lives, but the twins had just testified that Martha already felt like part of their family. Would that help or hurt? The 2-week waiting period was torture. Bill maintained perfect routines, attended every school event, documented every interaction. He barely slept, anxiety chewing through his nights. Martha called once to check on him, and Bill kept the conversation brief. Not because he wanted distance, but because he couldn't afford to give Elizabeth's attorneys ammunition. His sister visited again, finding Bill surrounded by legal documents and worst-case planning. "You're spiraling," she observed. "You've convinced yourself you're going to lose." "I might lose," Bill said flatly. "Elizabeth has stability and conventional family structure. I have recent major life changes and a complicated relationship, the one that's honest." His sister leaned forward. "Bill, you've spent your entire life being what other people expected. Where did any of that get you? A failed marriage, miserable children, an empire you don't respect. The moment you started being authentic, your life got better. Your daughters got happier. And now I might lose them for it," Bill said bitterly. "Or you might keep them and teach them that authenticity matters more than appearances, that fighting for what's right is worth the risk." She stood up. "Whatever the judge decides, at least you'll know you were honest. That's worth something, Bill. Maybe it's worth everything." After she left, Bill sat alone with her words and slowly let himself believe them. Maybe teaching Cora and Chloe that authentic living was worth the risk mattered more than guaranteeing a specific outcome. The night before the hearing reconvened, Bill sat down with the twins and had the most honest conversation of his life. "Whatever the judge decides tomorrow," he told them, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Proud of how brave you've been, how honest you were with him, how you're handling something scary with more grace than most adults could manage." "Are you scared?" Chloe asked, climbing into his lap. "Terrified," Bill admitted. "But I'm also grateful, because this whole situation forced me to figure out what matters most. And the answer is you two. Not my business or my reputation or what my family thinks of me. You two are the only thing that matters. We want to stay with you," Cora said fiercely. "We told the judge that. We told him you're the best dad, and we don't want to live somewhere else." Bill held his daughters close and let himself cry for the first time since this nightmare began. Not from fear, but from overwhelming love for these two small humans who'd somehow turned out better than he had any right to expect. That night, Bill barely slept. He lay awake thinking about patterns, about choices, about all the moments when he'd chosen safety over truth and regretted it. Tomorrow, a judge would decide if his recent growth was evidence of instability or evolution. Bill couldn't control that outcome. All he could control was his own testimony, his own truth, his own commitment to being someone his daughters could learn from. At dawn, Bill got up and wrote letters to Cora and Chloe. Letters they'd only read if he lost custody tomorrow. Letters that tried to explain why he'd made the choices he'd made. He sealed the letters and hid them away, hoping they'd never need to be read. Then Bill Savage got dressed, woke his daughters, and prepared to walk into a courtroom and fight for the thing that mattered most, whatever the cost might be. Chapter 7. The Crisis. The morning after the courthouse recess, Bill woke to his phone vibrating with news alerts. Half asleep, he grabbed it and saw Martha's name trending. His stomach dropped before his brain fully processed why. The headlines were brutal. City official under investigation for corruption. Development deal raises ethics questions. Jensen's past relationship with developer creates conflict of interest. Someone had leaked their history, twisted their professional collaboration into something sordid, and turned Martha's integrity into a political target. Bill sat up in bed, scrolling through articles that used carefully neutral language to imply terrible things. Anonymous sources questioned whether Martha had altered her position on the warehouse district development for personal rather than professional reasons. Her department was being investigated for ethical violations. The timeline of their renewed relationship was laid out with dates and meetings that looked damning when stripped of context. Old photographs from 5 years ago surfaced, Bill and Martha young and in love, completely unaware that their past would someday be weaponized. The court order echoed in Bill's head. He was not allowed to make any major life changes, not allowed to introduce complications into his daughter's routine. Contacting Martha now, defending her publicly, doing anything that drew attention to their relationship, would give Elizabeth's attorneys exactly the ammunition they needed. But watching Martha get destroyed by an investigation that only existed because of her connection to him felt like betrayal worse than anything he'd done 5 years ago. Bill got out of bed and paced his bedroom while his mind raced through options. He couldn't contact Martha directly. He couldn't issue public statements without looking defensive. He couldn't do any of the things a decent human being would do when someone they cared about was being attacked. The legal restrictions felt like chains. Then he remembered something his attorney had said. The court order restricted his personal behavior, his direct involvement with his daughter's routine. It said nothing about what he could say to his own business associates, his own board members, his own network of contacts who wielded influence in this city's power structures. Bill spent the next hour calling every person in his professional network who had connections to city politics. He didn't mention Martha by name in these calls. Instead, he talked about integrity in public service, about the importance of affordable housing initiatives that prioritized community over developer profits. He spoke about how rare it was to find city officials willing to stand up to powerful interests. He made it clear, without ever saying it explicitly, that anyone using political connections to interfere with a legitimate investigation would find themselves on the wrong side of Bill Savage's considerable influence. His board members received a different message. Bill called an emergency meeting and told them in language that left no room for misinterpretation, that any board member who used their political connections to damage Martha Jansen's investigation would be removed immediately. He didn't care about consequences, didn't care about profit implications, didn't care about anything except making sure his people weren't contributing to this attack. "You're destroying what's left of your credibility," one of his longtime associates said after the meeting. "People already think you've lost perspective because of this woman. Threatening the board over her investigation makes you look obsessed." "Then I look obsessed," Bill said coldly. "I'd rather be obsessed with defending someone's integrity than carefully calculating how to protect my reputation while good people get destroyed." The board member shook his head and left, and Bill knew another resignation letter would arrive before end of business day. He was burning bridges he'd spent decades building, alienating allies who'd supported his rise. But every time he considered backing down, he remembered standing outside Martha's apartment 5 years ago, watching her pack and doing nothing because speaking up felt too risky. Bill's father called that afternoon, voice tight with controlled fury. "I've been hearing disturbing things about your behavior. Threatening board members, alienating investors, making decisions based on personal feelings. This needs to stop, Bill. You're embarrassing the family, damaging the company, destroying your future." For his entire life, Bill had been chasing his father's approval, measuring his worth by whether the patriarch thought he was living up to the name. He'd married someone appropriate rather than someone he loved because his father thought strategic alliances mattered more than emotional connection. He'd built an empire using methods he didn't respect because his father defined success as accumulation, regardless of cost. "You're right," Bill said quietly into the phone. "My behavior needs to stop, but not the behavior you're talking about. What needs to stop is me caring more about your approval than my own integrity. What needs to stop is me building an empire I don't respect, using methods I'm ashamed of. What needs to stop is me pretending that the Savage legacy is something worth preserving when it's really just generations of ruthless men convincing themselves that cruelty is the same as strength." His father's silence was absolute. Bill pressed on. The savage empire was built on being harder than everyone else, sharper than everyone else, more willing to crush people who got in the way. You taught me that success meant never backing down, never compromising, never letting sentiment interfere with profit. And I believed you. I followed those lessons right into a marriage that made everyone miserable, right into building monuments to wealth that serve no one, right into raising daughters who are learning all the wrong lessons. Bill's voice shook, but he kept going. So yes, I'm embarrassing the family. I'm damaging the company. I'm destroying my future as you defined it. And I'm done pretending that's a bad thing. I'm done being the man you think I should be. You're making a mistake, his father said, each word precise and cold. I've made a lot of mistakes. But the biggest one was spending my life trying to earn your approval instead of figuring out what I actually wanted my life to mean. Bill took a breath. I love you. You're my father, and I'll always be grateful for the opportunities you provided. But I'm done living the life you designed for me. His father hung up without responding. Bill sat with his phone in his hand, feeling simultaneously devastated and liberated. He'd just burned the most important bridge in his life, the connection that had defined his choices since childhood. His father would never forgive this betrayal. But sitting in the silence after that conversation, Bill felt lighter than he'd felt in years. Over the next 3 days, Bill watched his professional life continue to unravel. 3 more board members resigned. His father stopped taking his calls entirely. Invitations to society events were quietly rescinded. People who'd been friends began keeping careful distance. The business press speculated about whether Bill Savage was having a breakdown. Bill ignored all of it. He focused on his daughters, on maintaining the routines the court had ordered, on proving through actions that his recent changes made him a better father. Cora and Chloe sensed the tension, but didn't fully understand it, and Bill worked hard to shield them. The investigation into Martha's department continued, feeding the news cycle with speculation. Bill couldn't defend her directly, couldn't stand beside her publicly, couldn't do anything except watch her fight alone while his silence looked like abandonment. He tried to tell himself that his behind-the-scenes efforts mattered, that creating counter-pressure in political circles would help. But watching Martha's reputation get shredded while he maintained careful distance felt like cowardice dressed up as strategy. The investigation eventually cleared Martha. Her consistent advocacy for affordable housing, her documented objections to luxury development long before Bill's project. Her spotless record all created an evidence trail that contradicted the corruption narrative. The anonymous sources turned out to be developers who'd lost deals to Martha's stricter standards. The investigation concluded that while Martha's past relationship with Bill created appearance issues, there was no evidence of actual ethical violations. But clearing her name didn't erase the damage. The speculation had been public and loud. The exoneration was official and quiet. People remembered the scandal more than the resolution. Bill saw her for the first time since the investigation began outside a municipal building on a gray afternoon. She was walking to her car, shoulders carrying exhaustion like physical weight, and Bill was leaving a meeting with contractors. They were 50 feet apart, too far for conversation but close enough to make eye contact. Bill wanted to run to her, wanted to apologize for not defending her publicly, wanted to explain the court order and custody restrictions. But the 2-week evaluation period still had 1 week remaining, and approaching Martha now could be used against him. So he just stood there, and when Martha noticed him, neither of them moved. They looked at each other across 50 feet of asphalt, 2 people who kept finding each other in wreckage. Martha's expression was unreadable, some combination of hurt and understanding and exhaustion. He raised one hand slightly, a gesture that could have meant anything, and Martha nodded once before getting into her car and driving away. Bill stood in that parking lot long after she left, understanding something fundamental about what loving Martha Jansen meant. It meant watching her fight battles partially caused by his existence in her life. It meant she would always pay a price for caring about him, It meant choosing her required accepting that she'd suffer consequences. 5 years ago, Bill had convinced himself that walking away from Martha was noble, that letting her leave protected her from his complicated world. But standing in that parking lot, Bill realized his noble sacrifice had been another form of cowardice. He'd protected himself from risk by framing abandonment as love. The truly brave choice would have been fighting for her 5 years ago, accepting that she'd face challenges being with him, trusting her to decide if he was worth those challenges rather than making that choice for her. Bill got in his car and drove to his attorney's office without calling ahead. She was with another client, but agreed to see him briefly. "I want to call Martha as a character witness in the custody hearing," Bill said as soon as her office door closed. His attorney stared at him. "That's possibly the worst idea you've ever had. Opposing counsel will eviscerate you for bringing her into this, especially right after her investigation. It'll look exactly like what Elizabeth's lawyers have been saying, or it'll look like I'm being honest about who matters in my life, and trusting the judge to see that having someone like Martha around makes me a better parent, not worse." Bill leaned forward. "I'm done hiding, done pretending that caring about someone is a weakness. Martha is important to me. My daughters care about her. If that costs me custody, at least I'll know I was honest instead of strategic." His attorney was quiet for a long moment. "This could backfire spectacularly, I know. But it's the truth, and I'd rather lose honestly than win by hiding who I actually am." She shook her head, but pulled out her legal pad. "If we're doing this, we need to prepare her testimony carefully. And Bill, you need to understand that this decision means you're all in. No more protecting yourself by keeping distance. You're committing to fighting for this publicly regardless of cost." "I understand," Bill said. And for the first time in years, he felt like he actually did understand. Bill called Martha that evening, breaking his self-imposed silence. She answered after several rings, her voice cautious. "I want you to testify at my custody hearing," Bill said without preamble. "I want to be honest about what you mean to me, about how my daughters feel about you, about the fact that trying to build something real with you is part of becoming someone better, rather than evidence of instability." Martha was silent so long, Bill thought she might have hung up. Then her voice came through, shaky with emotion. "That's going to cost you, I know. But pretending you don't matter would cost more. I let you walk away 5 years ago because I was afraid of choosing you over everyone else's expectations. I'm not making that mistake again." Bill looked out his window at the city lights. "I'm done hiding. Done protecting myself by pushing away the people who actually matter. So I'm asking you to testify, not because I think it'll help me win, but because it's the truth." Martha's breath came unsteady through the phone. "What if being honest means you lose them?" "Then I lose them knowing I tried to be authentic instead of calculating. And at least Cora and Chloe will know that I value truth over strategy." Bill closed his eyes. "I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to be honest beside me. Will you do that?" "Yes," Martha said softly. "Whatever you need. I'll be there." After they hung up, Bill sat in the darkness and let himself feel terrified and hopeful simultaneously. He'd just made a choice that could cost him everything. But sitting with that choice, Bill felt more aligned with himself than he'd felt since watching Martha walk away 5 years ago. He was done running, done calculating, done choosing safety over truth. Tomorrow, he'd tell his attorney to prepare Martha's testimony, and in 1 week, he'd stand in that courtroom and be completely honest, consequences be damned. For the first time in 5 years, Bill Savage was choosing love over legacy, truth over strategy, being real over being acceptable. It terrified him, but it also made him feel like himself again. Chapter 8. The Revelation. The courthouse felt different when Bill entered on the day the hearing reconvened. Elizabeth sat in her usual spot with her legal team, and Bill noticed she looked uncertain in a way she hadn't before, like something had shifted. Bill's attorney had warned him not to read too much into opposing counsel's body language, but he couldn't help hoping that whatever Cora and Chloe had said in that private chamber had mattered. The judge entered and the formalities began, but instead of immediately delivering his ruling, he asked both legal teams to approach the bench. Bill couldn't hear the conversation, but he watched his attorney's expression shift from professional neutrality to something that might have been surprise. When she returned, she leaned close to whisper, "He's going to disclose what the twins told him in chambers. He wants both parents to hear it directly before he rules." Her voice carried caution. "This is unusual. Whatever they said clearly impacted his thinking." Bill's heart hammered as the judge settled back and looked directly at both parents. "In my years on the bench, I've heard testimony from many children caught in custody disputes. Most tell me what they think their parents want to hear, or what will cause the least conflict. Cora and Chloe Savage were different. They spoke with the kind of honest perception that children sometimes possess before adults teach them to be careful with truth." The judge paused. "I'm going to share portions of their testimony because I believe both parents deserve to understand how their choices have impacted their daughters." The courtroom went absolutely silent. Bill felt Elizabeth's eyes on him, but couldn't bring himself to look at her. I asked the girls if they were happy in their current living arrangement. They both said yes without hesitation. I asked if they felt safe with their father, if he provided adequate care, if they had what they needed. Again, yes to everything. The judge looked up from his papers. Then I asked them to tell me about their father, not as a parent, but as a person. That's when the conversation became illuminating. Bill's hands gripped the table, knuckles white. Chloe told me that her father used to be tired all the time, that he would come home from work and sit in his study and look sad even though they had everything anyone could want. She said it felt like he was there, but not really there, like part of him was missing. And just the judge's voice remained neutral, but Bill felt every word like a physical blow. Cora added that they worried about their father, that even though they were just kids, they could tell something was wrong. She said it was like watching someone pretend to be happy when they were actually hollow inside. Bill closed his eyes, shame and recognition washing over him. I asked if things had changed recently. Both girls lit up immediately. They told me their father smiles now, real smiles instead of polite ones, that he actually listens when they talk instead of being distracted by work, that he cooks breakfast with them sometimes and asks questions about their day and seems interested in their answers. The judge flipped a page. Then, without my asking, they brought up Martha Jansen. Bill heard Elizabeth shift, but kept his eyes on the judge. The girls described Miss Jansen as someone who makes their father happy in a way they'd never seen before. They said she talks to them like they're real people instead of children to be managed. They said she asks questions about their drawings and their mathematical theories and actually listens to the answers. And then Chloe said something that I wrote down verbatim. Martha doesn't feel like a stranger trying to fit into our family. She feels like someone who already belongs there without even trying. Bill's breath caught. I asked the girls about their mother and her fiancé. They were diplomatic, the way children are when they don't want to hurt anyone. They said their mother is nice but busy with her new family, that her fiancé tries hard but doesn't really know them, that visiting her house feels like being guests somewhere instead of being home. Cora told me, Mom wants us to fit into her new life. Dad's building his new life around us. That's the difference. Across the aisle, Elizabeth's face crumbled. Bill felt a wave of complicated emotion, regret for their failed marriage mixed with gratitude that their daughters could articulate what he'd been trying to show. I asked a final question. If you could design your perfect life, what would it look like? Both girls described essentially their current arrangement, living primarily with their father, visiting their mother regularly, but with one addition. They wanted Martha to be part of their lives officially. They wanted the person who makes their father happy to stick around. They wanted someone in their home who demonstrates what genuine connection looks like. Because as Cora said, we don't want to grow up thinking love means settling for someone appropriate instead of someone you actually want. The judge set his papers aside and looked directly at Elizabeth. Ms. Hartwick, I need to ask you something directly, and I'm requiring you to answer under oath. Is this custody motion truly about your daughter's welfare? Or is it about something else? Elizabeth stood slowly, her attorney trying to whisper cautions that she ignored. She looked at Bill for the first time since the hearing had begun, and he saw tears in her eyes. I thought it was about their welfare, Elizabeth said, her voice shaking. I convinced myself that Bill was being erratic, that his recent changes proved he couldn't be trusted. But sitting here listening to what our daughters actually said, what they actually feel, she paused. I was angry. Angry that he's found something with Martha that we never had. Angry that he's happy in a way he never was with me. Angry that our daughters can see the difference. I wanted to punish him for never being able to love me completely, for making me feel inadequate every day of our marriage, because I knew I could never be whoever he actually wanted. The courtroom remained frozen. Elizabeth's attorney looked horrified. But Elizabeth kept going. The girls are happy with Bill. They're thriving. And I've barely been present in their lives for 2 years because being around them reminded me of everything I didn't have in my marriage. My fiancé is wonderful, but he doesn't really know Cora and Chloe. He tries, but they're right that it feels forced. Elizabeth looked at the judge. I don't want to take them away from the one parent who's actually been present and consistent. I was just so angry at Bill for finally becoming the person he should have been all along. The judge nodded slowly. Thank you for your honesty, Ms. Hartwick. That took courage. He opened the folder in front of him and began his ruling. Joint custody arrangements work best when both parents are actively engaged in their children's lives and able to cooperate for their children's benefit. What I see here is a father who, despite recent professional changes that some might view as erratic, has actually become more present and authentic in his parenting. I see 2 children who are thriving academically and emotionally in their father's care. I see a mother who has been minimally involved for 2 years and who has now admitted that her custody motion was driven more by personal feelings than by genuine concern. Bill held his breath. Primary physical custody will remain with William Savage. Visitation arrangements for Ms. Hartwick will continue as currently structured, with the understanding that both parents should work toward increasing her involvement gradually. The judge looked at Bill directly. However, Mr. Savage, I'm adding a specific condition to this custody arrangement. Bill's stomach dropped. Any romantic relationship you pursue must be stable and genuine before you integrate a new partner into your daughter's daily lives. I'm not restricting who you see or what relationships you form. I'm simply requiring that you demonstrate stability and genuine commitment before introducing anyone as a permanent fixture. Your daughters have already experienced one failed marriage. They deserve to see what healthy, committed partnership looks like. The gavel came down. The hearing was over. Bill had won custody, but the judge's warning echoed. He needed to prove that his relationship with Martha was real and stable. Elizabeth left the courtroom quickly. Bill felt no triumph in her admission, only sad recognition that their marriage had damaged both of them. Outside the courthouse, Bill found Martha waiting on the steps. She'd come even though she hadn't been called to testify. When their eyes met, everything Bill had been holding in broke open. "I have custody," he said, and Martha's face lit with genuine joy. "I knew you would. Those girls love you." The judge said, "I need to prove any relationship is stable before integrating someone into their lives." He said they deserve to see what healthy partnership looks like. Bill moved closer. "I want that to be us. I want to prove through actions that what we have is real, that it's the kind of love Cora and Chloe should learn from." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "Bill, I'm terrified of trying again and having it fall apart, terrified of your daughters getting attached and then losing me if this doesn't work." "I'm terrified too," Bill admitted, "but I'm done letting fear make my choices. I can't promise this will be easy, but I can promise that I'll fight for you this time, that I won't let you walk away because I'm afraid." Martha squeezed his hand, and Bill felt 5 years of distance finally starting to close. "Come to dinner," Bill said. "Tonight, with me and the girls. Not as a project partner or someone I used to know, as Martha, the woman I've loved for 12 years, the woman my daughters already think belongs in our family." Martha looked at him for a long moment, fear and hope visible in her expression. Then she nodded. "Yes, I'd like that." They stood on the courthouse steps a moment longer, two people who'd loved each other through separation and mistakes and growth, finally ready to start building something real. Chapter 9. The Threshold. Bill emerged from the courthouse with custody secured but feeling emotionally flayed open. Every choice, every mistake, every moment of the last 5 years had been examined and judged, and somehow he'd come out the other side with the thing that mattered most. His daughters. Martha was waiting on the courthouse steps, and Cora and Chloe were at school expecting him to pick them up, and everything that happened next would determine whether he'd actually learned anything or whether he'd just survived without changing. He texted his attorney that they'd connect tomorrow, thanked her and walked toward Martha with deliberate purpose. She watched him approach with an expression that held 5 years of hurt and hope tangled together. "Tell me what you're thinking," Bill said when he reached her, not touching her yet, because earning that right required more than wanting it. "Tell me what terrifies you about trying this again." Martha wrapped her arms around herself, defensive posture that said she'd gotten comfortable with distance. "Everything terrifies me. The fact that loving you nearly destroyed me 5 years ago, and I'm considering risking that again. The fact that your daughters are already attached, and if this falls apart, they'll be the ones who get hurt. The fact that your world demanded things from you 5 years ago that made us impossible, and I'm not sure what's actually changed, except that you've decided to fight those demands instead of accepting them. What's changed is that I finally figured out that being acceptable isn't the same as being happy. That building an empire my father approves of isn't worth losing everyone who actually matters. That the savage legacy is only valuable if I'm teaching my daughters that authenticity matters more than appearances." Bill moved slightly closer. "But you're right that the external pressures haven't disappeared. My family still thinks I've lost my mind. People still judge you for being with me. Those complications are real, and I can't promise they won't keep causing problems." "Then what are you promising?" Martha asked. "I'm promising to fight. To choose you even when choosing you is complicated. To stand beside you when people attack, instead of protecting myself by keeping distance. To prove through actions that you matter more than anyone's approval." Bill finally reached out and took her hand. "I'm promising to be the man you needed 5 years ago. And I'm promising to let you walk away if you decide the complications aren't worth it, instead of making that decision for you because I'm afraid of risk." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "What if I'm not strong enough? What if loving you costs more than I can afford? Then we figure it out together instead of you facing it alone. That's what partnership means, right? Shared burden, shared joy, shared commitment to figuring out how to make something work." Bill squeezed her hand gently. "Come to dinner tonight. Meet my daughters as someone who matters in my life. Let them see what it looks like when I choose authenticity over safety. That's all I'm asking right now." Martha was quiet for a long moment, warring with herself visibly. Then she nodded. "One dinner. But Bill, if this doesn't work, if we try and it falls apart again, I don't think I'll survive losing you twice." "Then we'll make sure it works," Bill said with more confidence than he felt. "We'll be honest and patient and willing to do the hard work. We'll mess up and figure it out and keep choosing each other even when it would be easier not to." They parted with plans for dinner, and Bill went to pick up his daughters, feeling like he was standing on the edge of something enormous. Everything could still fall apart. Martha could decide the complications weren't worth it. His daughters could struggle with the idea of their father having someone new in his life. But for the first time in 5 years, Bill was willing to risk failure instead of guaranteeing it by never trying. Cora and Chloe were waiting in the school pickup line, both scanning cars anxiously until they spotted their father. They climbed into the back seat with barely contained energy. "What happened? Do we have to move? Are you okay?" Chloe's voice carried particular anxiety. "I have custody," Bill said, and watched relief transform both their faces. "You're staying with me, visiting your mum regularly, but living here in our house, continuing your normal routines." Cora leaned forward between the front seats. "What did the judge say about Martha?" "He said any relationship I pursue needs to be stable before it becomes part of your daily routine. He said you deserve to see what healthy partnership looks like." Bill looked at his daughters in the rearview mirror. "I need to talk to you both about Martha, about what she means to me, and how that might affect our family." He drove to a park instead of heading straight home, needing neutral space for a conversation this important. They sat at a picnic table, and Bill tried to figure out how to explain complicated adult feelings to children who deserved honesty but also deserved age-appropriate clarity. "You know that Martha and I knew each other before I married your mom," Bill began carefully. "We were in love once, a long time ago. Then I let her leave because I thought being a savage meant building the empire everyone expected instead of fighting for the person I actually wanted. That was a mistake." "Did you love Mom?" Chloe asked with directness. "I cared about your mother. I respected her. I wanted our marriage to work. But I didn't love her the way people should love each other when they build a life together. I thought I could make up for that with effort and commitment, but all I did was make both of us miserable." Bill took a breath. "Your mom deserved someone who loved her completely. I couldn't be that person because part of my heart was always somewhere else. That wasn't fair to her." Cora processed this with her usual seriousness. "Is Martha the somewhere else?" "Yes, Martha is the person I should have fought for 5 years ago. The person I've loved for 12 years, even when I pretended I didn't. The person who makes me feel like myself instead of like I'm performing a role." Bill looked at both his daughters. "She's scared to try again because I hurt her when I let her leave. I'm scared to try again because what if I mess it up and lose the best thing that ever happened to me twice? But we're going to try anyway. Are you asking our permission?" Chloe looked confused. "I'm not asking permission. Adult relationships aren't your responsibility. But I am asking you to understand that having Martha in my life means she'll be in your lives too, and I need to know how you feel about that." Bill leaned forward. "The judge said I need to prove any relationship is stable before it becomes part of your daily routine. That means Martha and I will be taking things slowly, figuring out if we can build something lasting. But eventually, if things work out, she'll be around more. Is that something you can be okay with?" Both girls were quiet. Then Cora spoke with philosophical wisdom. "We already told the judge that Martha feels like she belongs. We meant that. She doesn't try too hard or act fake or treat us like we're stupid. She just talks to us like we're people." Cora paused. "But we don't want to get attached if she's going to leave again. We don't want to care about someone who might disappear." "That's fair," Bill acknowledged. "I can't promise Martha will never leave. People make their own choices. But I can promise that I'm going to fight for her this time, that I'm going to show her through actions that she matters. And I can promise that whatever happens, I'll be honest with you about it. What if loving her makes you less available for us? Chloe asked, voicing the fear that probably lived under most children's concerns. Bill pulled both girls into a hug. You two are the most important people in my world. Nothing changes that. But part of being a good parent is showing you what healthy love looks like. I couldn't show you that with your mum because I didn't have that with your mum. Maybe I can show you that with Martha. They sat in the park for another hour, the twins asking questions and Bill answering them as honestly as he could. By the time they headed home, Cora and Chloe seemed cautiously excited about Martha coming to dinner. That evening, Bill cooked while the twins set the table with careful attention. Martha arrived exactly on time, carrying wine for the adults and a card game she'd mentioned. She looked nervous in a way Bill had never seen from her, like someone who decided to be brave but wasn't sure bravery would be enough. Dinner was awkward at first, everyone too aware of the wait. But Chloe broke the tension by asking Martha to explain why affordable housing mattered, and Martha launched into an explanation that somehow held attention completely. The conversation flowed from there. Bill watched his daughters with Martha and saw what he'd been missing. Genuine connection, unforced warmth, the kind of ease that came from people actually liking each other. This was what Cora and Chloe needed to see. Not that love meant settling for someone acceptable, but that love meant fighting for someone extraordinary, even when fighting was hard. After dinner, Martha taught the twins her card game while Bill cleaned up. Through the kitchen doorway, he could hear laughter and friendly trash talk. This was what he'd sacrificed 5 years ago. Not just his own happiness, but the possibility of giving his daughters an example of authentic love. Later, after the twins had gone to bed and Martha was preparing to leave, they stood in Bill's foyer in careful space between wanting to touch and not quite knowing if they'd earned that right. "Thank you for tonight," Bill said. "For being patient, for being honest with them, for being exactly who you are." "They're wonderful," Martha said softly. "You've done well with them despite everything." "I've done terribly with them," Bill corrected. "They're wonderful in spite of me, but maybe I can start doing better now." Martha reached out and touched his face, a gentle gesture that carried years of complicated feeling. "I'm still terrified, but I'm willing to try. Slowly, carefully, with clear eyes about complications. But I'm willing." Bill covered her hand with his. "That's all I'm asking. Just a chance to prove I've learned that I can be who you needed 5 years ago." Martha left, and Bill went to check on his daughters. Both were awake, reading. "We like her," Cora announced. "Not just because she's nice or smart. We like how you are when you're with her." "How am I?" Bill asked. "Real," Chloe called from her room. "You're real instead of careful. You smile like you mean it. You look like yourself instead of like you're pretending to be someone else." Bill said goodnight and went to his own room, those words echoing. Real instead of careful. Himself instead of pretending. That was what he'd lost 5 years ago, what he'd been trying to recover ever since. But feeling it for one evening was different from sustaining it through complicated reality. Martha was right to be cautious. Bill's job now was to prove through consistent action that he'd actually changed. The next morning, Bill woke to an email from his father. Short, cold, devastating in its formality. The family patriarch was officially divesting from Bill's company, severing all business ties, and making clear that Bill's recent choices had consequences. Bill read it twice, feeling the weight of final bridges burning. He could have felt destroyed. 5 years ago he would have been, but sitting in his home office while his daughters got ready for school, Bill felt something unexpected. Relief. The constant pressure to live up to his father's expectations was gone now. His phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Thinking about last night. Thank you for letting me be part of something real." Bill smiled and typed back. "Thank you for being willing to try again. We're going to figure this out, slowly and honestly." He sent the text and went to make breakfast for his daughters, ready to start building the life he should have fought for 5 years ago. The foundation was laid. The house was yet to be built. But for the first time in his adult life, Bill Savage was constructing something based on what he actually wanted. And that felt like the beginning of everything that mattered. Chapter 10. The Foundation. Bill waited outside the community center until Martha finished her evening session, watching through the windows as she worked with families who'd soon benefit from the affordable housing development they'd built together. Children surrounded her, mothers asked questions she answered with patient attention, and Bill saw her fully for what felt like the first time. Not as the woman he'd lost or the second chance he didn't deserve, but as someone extraordinary who enriched the world regardless of whether he was part of it. The last family left, and Martha began gathering materials. Bill entered and waited while she organized papers and folded chairs, giving her time to notice him rather than startling her. "Hello," Martha said when she finally looked up, her voice carrying neither surprise nor irritation. "I need to tell you everything," Bill said without preamble. "The custody hearing, what my daughters said, what the judge ruled, what it means for us." Martha gestured to 2 chairs, and they sat in the quiet community center while Bill told her about the twins' testimony, about their brutal honesty regarding his transformation, about how they'd mentioned her without being asked. He told her about Elizabeth's admission under oath, about the judge's ruling that kept custody with him, about the specific condition requiring any romantic relationship to be stable before integration. "So I have custody," Bill concluded, "but I also have the responsibility of proving that whatever I build with you is genuine and lasting." The judge said Cora and Chloe deserve to see what healthy partnership looks like. That means we can't rush this, can't just fall into each other because it feels right. We have to build something real. Martha was quiet, processing everything. Then she spoke, her voice steady despite visible emotion. 5 years ago, I left because your world demanded things I couldn't provide. I told myself I was doing you a favor, that I'd hold you back. But the truth is, I was terrified. Terrified that you'd eventually resent me for not fitting into your world. Terrified that love wouldn't be enough when family pressure and professional expectations started crushing us. I did choose the empire, Bill said quietly. I let you leave because I was afraid of disappointing my father, afraid of failing to build what the Savage name demanded. And I've paid for that choice every day since. What's different now? Martha asked. Your father still has expectations. Your professional world still has demands. All the complications are still there. What's different is that I finally understand what I gave up. My marriage was punishment for choosing wrong. My daughters grew up in a house full of expensive things and empty connections. Bill leaned forward. I built an empire and it cost me everything worth having. I'm done making that mistake. So what are you offering me? Martha's voice was gentle but firm. It looks like patience. Building trust slowly. It looks like honesty about complications, instead of pretending everything is perfect. It looks like me proving through consistent action that you matter more than anyone's approval. Bill pulled out his phone and showed her the email from his father. It looks like this. My father divesting from my company, severing family ties, and me being okay with that because I'm done letting his expectations run my life. Martha read the email, her expression shifting from shock to sadness to something that might have been hope. You're burning bridges you can never rebuild. I'm burning bridges I should have burned 5 years ago instead of sacrificing you to keep them standing. Bill put his phone away. I can't promise this will be simple, but I can promise that I'll fight beside you instead of protecting myself by keeping distance. Bill, Martha said, tears streaming now. I spent 5 years building a life that didn't include you. I don't know if I'm strong enough to risk that again. Then we'll figure it out together, Bill said. We'll mess up and be honest about messing up and keep choosing each other anyway. But at least we'll be trying instead of spending another 5 years wondering what might have been. Martha reached across the space and took Bill's hand. The touch was electric. 5 years of separation compressed into a single moment. "I need time," she said. "Time to trust that this isn't another beautiful beginning with a devastating ending. Time to let your daughters get to know me without the pressure of being integrated before we're ready." "Take all the time you need," Bill said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here, proving through actions that I've changed." They sat in that community center for another hour, talking about fears and hopes and practical complications. It wasn't romantic or dramatic, just two people being honest about obstacles and committing to work through them. When Martha finally stood to leave, Bill walked her to her car. The night was cool, city lights reflecting off clouds. "I'm terrified," Martha admitted as she unlocked her car. "But I'm willing to try." "That's all I'm asking." Bill wanted to kiss her, wanted to collapse the distance physically, but he didn't. Some things needed to be earned. "I'll call you tomorrow. We'll have dinner again later this week. We'll take this slowly and build something that lasts." Martha nodded and got in her car. Bill watched her drive away, then walked to his own car, feeling simultaneously terrified and hopeful. At home, Cora and Chloe were already asleep. Bill checked on them both, watching his daughters breathe peacefully. These two small humans were watching everything he did, learning from his choices. They'd watched his marriage fail. They'd watched him be miserable. Now they were watching him try to build something real. Bill went to his study and pulled out the letters he'd written before the final custody hearing, the letters meant for his daughters, if he lost them. He read through them now, these desperate attempts to explain his choices, and realized they were no longer necessary. He hadn't lost his daughters. He'd kept them, and now he had the chance to show them through living what it meant to choose love over legacy. He filed the letters away and opened his laptop. His company was thriving despite resignations and his father's departure. The warehouse development was moving forward with community support. His professional reputation had taken hits, but the projects he was proud of were succeeding. His phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "Made it home. Thank you for tonight. For being honest about complications. For being willing to build slowly. For being someone I can trust to stay when things get hard," Bill typed carefully. "Thank you for being willing to try despite every reason not to. I know I have to earn your trust through consistent action. I know we have hard work ahead, but I'm ready for that work, ready to prove that choosing you is the foundation of everything else. Sleep well." He sent the text and sat in the quiet, thinking about foundations and what they required. Patience, honesty, willingness to build carefully, commitment to doing the work even when difficult. He'd spent 5 years building an empire on a foundation of regretted choices. Now he had the chance to build something different. The next months would be crucial, proving to Martha that transformation was permanent, integrating her slowly into his daughters' lives, balancing responsibilities as a father with his desire to build something with the woman he loved. None of it would be easy, but sitting in his study with his daughters, sleeping safely upstairs, and Martha's text still glowing on his phone, Bill felt like himself. Not the performance of who a savage man should be, but genuinely himself. Bill closed his laptop and went to bed, ready to start the next phase of building. The foundation was laid. Martha was willing to try. His daughters were watching. The work ahead would be hard, but it would be honest work, building something real. That was worth fighting for. That was worth the risk. That was worth everything.